Okay, hi everybody. Today we are very lucky to have some behavior consultants from Skypoint, Indiana. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, my name is Brittany Collins. I'm the Director of Behavior Management at Skypoint Social Services. I am not a behavior consultant, but I am a source of contact for if you're interested in having a behavior consultant come and meet with your family to discuss services.
All right, I'm Jordan Reyes. I'm another BC or ABC at Skypoint Social Services, and I graduated from Indiana Tech with a psychology degree in my bachelor's and master's. And I've been a BC since March of this year, and I've had a background in social services since October of 2020. And so I'm kind of fresh, but I also have a background in coaching. So I'm a leader with kids. I've been doing that for about 3 years as well. And it's about all of my background, so I'll leave it to someone else.
Jessica. I am a BC with Skypoint Social Services. I have been with them since they started in, gosh, what year was that? 17. Before that, I worked for another behavior specialist company. So I have been doing behavior work since I graduated with my master's from St. Francis in 2013. And I actually did my internship with BCs before that. So I've been doing this work since about 2011. Prior to that, I did some residential work with adolescent boys. And Medicaid waiver is my specialty. So those with intellectual disabilities and whatnot, autism, all of that, that is where I thrive, really. I live in Fort Wayne, have my whole life with my husband and my wonderful 11-year-old daughter. And that is pretty much me.
I'm Lori. I'm a BC with Skypoint. I've been a BC for a couple of years, and prior to that, I did develop some programs for Easter Seals ARC for adults with developmental disabilities, and then that led to some programs through Fort Wayne Community Schools for teens with disabilities. I have a master's in counseling and an undergrad in psychology, and 3 kids at home, 2 adult kids, and our 5th grandbaby on the way.
Hi, I'm Sue Ann Nolan, and I'm a behavior consultant with Skypoint, new to Skypoint. I have, although 6 years experience as a behavior consultant with 2 different companies, and I have the bulk of my experience in education. I have 8 to 9 years in education. I've worked with emotional disabilities. I've worked with mild and learning disabilities, and then I've worked with applied skills, which would be the IDD, DD population. I've also worked with the housing authority, even so I've been a mobility counselor, and I worked with those with disabilities in that area too, trying to help them through that process. So I kind of go wherever I can to support people who need a little extra support. And as I said, from Fort Wayne, I live here with my family, and hopefully we'll get to work with you soon. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. So do you all have experience with working with clients with the more extreme behaviors?
So I currently have a couple clients that I work with, and they exhibit biting, aggression, destruction of property, and violence. And working with those individuals, it takes a lot of patience, working with the parents, and just making sure that everyone's on the same page, and that there's a lot of structure and routine regarding that, and that there's a crisis plan right away in case of any of those behaviors were to happen in the time that I'm absent.
Okay.
I have experience too with that, with extreme behaviors. And like he said, the safety plan is probably the #1 thing that you need to have put in place. And then it's really important to make sure that there's de-escalation techniques. So hopefully you don't get to the extreme areas of the behavior so they don't escalate. So that's something that we want to focus on too.
So is the safety plan something that the behavioralist brings up or that the client would bring up?
The safety plan is something that the behavior consultant is going to create for the team, for the family.
What should someone look for when choosing a behavioralist or behavior consultant?
So I think that that's really individualized to a family. I think when you make the decision to consider behavior management as a service under your waiver, you really need to think about what is it that you as a family are comfortable with and what does that client need? So you can come into it with the parameters of, I really feel like we need a female or a male BC, or, my child really does seem to respond better to people that have clear authority and they can't compare as a peer or vice versa. So you can set some parameters and then you get the opportunity to do a meet and greet. And we really encourage multiple meet and greets. Don't just select the first person that calls you. Really consider or ask for multiple behavior consultants to come interview with you and take your time to decide who you're comfortable moving forward with.
Okay.
And you can use, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish and then I'll ask a question.
You can use those meet and greet sessions, and you should, to also kind of get a feel for what the BC would have in mind. Most of us kind of already know if we can figure out what those target behaviors are, like you said, the biting, if it's sibling interaction, things like that. It shouldn't be too difficult for us to say, okay, well, this is how I would start to address this. Because all BCs are different. There's one, and all clients are different as well. So there's no one way to address a behavior, but it is important to kind of feel that out a little bit, and also not be afraid to say like, well, that isn't going to work in my home. So that we know as a BC, like, okay, well, I need to think outside the box then, or, go to plan B or whatnot. So being willing to ask those questions and just realizing, like Brittany said, just because you've met with us doesn't mean we're it. You can see more people within Skypoint, for example. You could interview with multiple different companies. It's really all about client choice and what the parent and the child thinks is going to be best. So you have the options.
I have a question, and it's behavior specific. So if you are a caregiver or a parent of a young person or a person who does have aggressive and self-injurious behaviors, if you were the parent, what would be like 2 questions you would want to ask a potential behaviorist to even see if they are somebody who would want to or could deal with these behaviors? And I know that's hard because I'm saying 2 questions, if you have more, but or 1 question for each of you. It'd be interesting to know what your perspective would be, each of you.
I think you're the authority in your own home. Oh, sorry, Jess.
Go ahead, Britt.
I'm not even doing it. Sorry. I think something that I think would be a commonality in all of our behavior consultants at Skypoint is an understanding that you're the authority in your home. So asking what you've tried and how that's worked, and really finding out the history of where you've gotten to this place where now you need to ask for help. That's really important.
I would ask them straight out, as I mentioned earlier, like, what would you do to address this behavior? What would you do to address the biting? And just see what they have to say. And we all have our specialties. I do have experience with some extreme behaviors, but that is not my comfort zone. That is not my expertise.
Mhm.
So when they reach a certain level, and I would probably bow out and refer to someone who is more qualified to do that, because I want what's best for the client. And sometimes that's not me.
Mhm.
And so having that conversation and the parents asking those questions could lead to us to realize that maybe I am not the best fit. Maybe Sue Ann would be better. And one of the good things that I really like about Skypoint is that we're all consultants, so we're kind of separate, but they do a really good job about connecting us and letting us get to know one another. So I have a pretty good idea within our company who is better at things than I am, for instance. So I should fairly quickly be able to say, that's not necessarily something that I'm comfortable with or that I have really good experience with, but Jordan would be great at this. So if you're open to, let me hook you guys up, let me get you his contact information so that you can set up and meet with him, because I think he would be a better fit than me.
Anybody
Does
else?
anyone, just to follow up with that, thank you so much. Does anyone who, I hate to use the word enjoy because that's not the right word, but I can't think of one right now. Does anyone, because I have seen people who you use the word comfort level, that they just have a comfort level with working with more extreme behaviors. How do you find that out pretty quickly? Is it experience? Should they have certain experience, or is it a personality trait, or is it, is there something that you can pretty much say, yeah, I can see they're comfortable with this?
So I can kind of touch on that because I work with a lot of extreme behaviors, like I mentioned earlier. And a question that I would ask, and we might touch on this a little bit later, is making sure they're comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so there's different behaviors that a parent may not want to talk about with their kid, and they want to make sure the BC is comfortable talking about that. So like a male on male, maybe they're doing something inappropriate in the room or something like that. And if there's a female BC or another BC that may not feel comfortable addressing that, then it might be a good idea to look for someone else, because you want to make sure that there's open communication, so that if there is something there that the parent might not be seeing or someone else in the team might not be seeing, the BC's there and has all the information to gather what's kind of going on. And if the BC isn't comfortable talking about those things, some things may be left out and then may never be touched. So I think that talking with them about what's going on and expressing your concern and the level of severity of the behavior to make sure they are aware of what's going on and what they're getting themselves into, and just having that open conversation, open dialogue about the behavior and if they're comfortable with working with what's going on. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The more open and honest the parents can be with the BC during that meet and greet, the better it's going to be for everyone. I know that's one of the later questions, but honestly, the best to figure that out is to just ask them, are you comfortable dealing with my physically aggressive son? Or, and what you're comfortable with as well, to kind of to touch on Jordan. I have a client who is inappropriately masturbating, basically, and I'm fine with that. I would be fine to address that, but because I'm a female and he's a male, his parents are not okay with me addressing that with him. So just as an example, it's not just about what we're comfortable with either. It's about what the parents are comfortable with. So just being open and honest and communicating things so that we can find the best fit for you. I don't know a single BC that wants a client so badly that they are going to take one on that they aren't comfortable with or that they can't handle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know sometimes parents might feel like ashamed or whatever of the behaviors, and they don't want to really be honest, but it is very helpful, like you said, to just lay it out and be like, this is what's going on. So when someone does start behavioral therapy, I know this is going to be like one of those it depends kind of questions, but what should someone expect? Like, what does it look like? Is it in the home? Is it outside of the home kind of stuff?
So yes to all of that. So it is going to depend on the needs of the child and of the family. So for some of my families, I like to have a quick meeting with the parent before or after a session, and that session could be in the home if the home environment is good for that. Just, you know, not too much commotion, too much noise, that type of thing. Or it might be also out in the community, and that could be at the library in one of those little rooms that you can, you know, reserve, or it can be like, you know, doing an activity in the community. Again, it just depends on what you're working on. So I have one family where I come and meet the student when he gets off the bus, and I start working with him right away, because if he has too much downtime, then he's not going to want to do anything with me. So we work on the floor on different activities and so forth, and then I'll stay after and talk with the foster mom afterwards. So that's one idea. Another one is like I'll take them out to like coffee or something, and we discuss the behavior there. It just depends on what you're working on. If it's maybe somebody who's got more extreme behaviors and going out in the community isn't, you know, such a good thing. Maybe the bulk of your training is going to be spent with the parents first, you know, so that they have all the tools they need in their toolbox, and then we can pull back, and then I can start working, you know, with the kiddo too. So it's just a balance and seeing what's best for the situation.
Okay. In an ideal world, this obviously doesn't happen, but how many hours do you think would be a good amount to work with somebody that does have the more extreme behaviors? I know we're limited by budgets and everything, but what would you prefer if you could?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that really is a kind of a loaded question. Again, it depends on the behaviors and also the client and the parents' schedules. So, you know, while, especially if they have siblings or there are other kids in the home, it might be that we need, you know, 5 hours a week, ideally with the client, so 20 hours a month. But that might not be realistic for the family. They have a bazillion other things going on, and they can't take 5 hours a week out of their day or out of their days for that. So it's really, in an ideal world, I'm going to hate this answer. It's however much time is needed. And I would go with at least 15 hours a month. That would be probably minimum for an extreme behavior. I do 6 hours for just like basic behavior, so not considered an extreme behavior. But I want all my clients to have at least 6 hours a month, just as a baseline. So I would go at least 15 for an extreme behavior, and more based on need and availability of the client and the family.
Okay. I know I've done a lot of, you know, like the tracking, the worksheets, things like that. So what methods can be used to work on behaviors? What kind of questionnaires or analysis can be done? And under what circumstances, like FBAs and stuff like that? Like, when do you do what?
Sure. So the amazing thing about behavior management is that you can pull from a lot of diverse disciplines. So as far as techniques that can be used, you know, here in this Zoom link, we have counseling backgrounds, psychology backgrounds, mental health background, education backgrounds, and they're pulling from a lot of different best practices. So a lot of them use diverse techniques to meet your individual family's needs. And then, so what to expect within a case is initially, it's going to be a lot of rapport building and observation. And then once some target behaviors have been identified, with each of those target behaviors, behavior consultants are going to do a functional behavioral assessment. So they're going to try to identify what basic function is this maladaptive behavior trying to meet. So a lot of times it's attention seeking, sometimes it's escape, sometimes it's getting tangible items. And then they're gonna cater interventions around teaching a different way for your individual in your life to get that function met in a much healthier way that allows them to be most effective in their home or community or academic setting. And how they go about that can be, again, pulling from so many different types of disciplines and what works best for that individual and for your family.
And I know, like it can be more training on the parents, and because I think some people, they're like, okay, I'm going to get a behavior therapist. They're going to come in, they're going to fix everything. And that's not like, that's not necessarily what happens. It's a lot of work and a lot of time, right?
Yeah, Lori, do you want to go ahead and answer about why that's important for parents?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if that was the question. So you mean the collaborating with everyone with?
Mhm.
Okay, so we do a lot of that. We collaborate with the schools, the teachers, we go to their med checks, the doctor's office, other supports. We have team meetings where we meet with sometimes their speech therapists and their occupation therapists. And that way we're all working together as a team to figure out what works for a speech therapist might not work for OT, or we might be able to go in and actually, I've been in situations where I've had kiddos that they need the speech and they need the OT, and I just have to be in there with them, showing them how to redirect and to empathize and to just control the environment to avoid certain behaviors and or triggers. But we definitely, we work wherever the behavior that we're trying to change is happening. So if it's at recess, we'll go to recess and we'll work with even other peers. Sometimes it's peer work or just a matter of like bonding within the family, or getting the teacher or the gym teacher to understand, hey, this is going on and this is what works, and giving them some tools so that it just becomes a better and more supportive relationship with everyone that's involved. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Why are parents asked to do tracking for behaviors, and why are some behavioralists more focused on paperwork or tracking and others are not? Like, is that kind of a company thing, or is that based on like their experience? What kind of things?
I think there's some flexibility within whoever the behavior consultant is. So it kind of depends on what they're most comfortable with. Tracking is important to find out, to discover triggers or flags for the parents, and then also what happens afterwards. So does the consequence relate to the behavior? And if that's whatever the consequence is, if that's not helping, then, like changing and replacing those behaviors in different ways. But as far as, I don't think in the beginning, we all have to, and then once a year, we all have to track and do some evaluating, and we put that in the paperwork. But as far as the consistency, it's just it just depends on what's working for the family on the tracking and what's working for the BC. And a lot of times parents don't like to track in the heat of the moment. It's hard for them to go, oh, okay, this behavior just happened and this just escalated and now we're doing this and let me go write it all down. So a lot of times it's afterwards, and sometimes it's just a matter of sending the BC a text or giving us a call or writing it down or talking to us later. But there's all different ways to track, and just kind of whatever works in the environment that the client is in.
Right. I know that I've had in the past, like where they've given me like an actual paper and it's like, I lost the thing, I don't know how many times. So I just get like a note in my cell phone and just be like, okay, this time this happened, and and I think you were kind of hinting on like the ABC, like the antecedent behavior and
Yes.
consequence. Can you kind of just go into that a little bit?
So the ABC, the reason it's helpful is because we can see what leads up to the behavior, what the triggers are, what the slow triggers are, the fast triggers are, and we identify those also in the behavior support plan. And then obviously the behavior, what's happening, what's the behavior we want to replace, and then what happens afterwards. Is the consequence meeting or related to the behavior? Because a lot of times when it's not effective. So just those kinds of things, but like what you said, if they're dealing with these big behaviors and it's overwhelming and they have to bring someone in for support, it's really hard to sit down and just, logically think out the ABC in the heat of the moment. And sometimes you miss the trigger in that. So that's what's so great about our jobs, that we can be in the home or in the environment and actually be an objective observer of those.
Right. And looking at the data, you can see something that the parent might not be realizing also.
Exactly. Yes. And then we can
Right.
also track as things get better or worse. We can show, positive increases or negative. Go ahead,
Right.
Suzanne.
I was just going to say, for the tracking purposes, I mean, you might see a pattern that way to find, the different times of day where you're actually seeing the behavior, which you might not notice if you're just doing it from memory so much. So sometimes it's good to have paper, pencil. I mean, this is a personality thing, but I think if it's like an ABC kind of thing, I would almost rather you guys like just talk it out or write it down later on, like not try to do it in the heat of moment. But if it's tracking something that happens like at a high frequency, that happens, quickly, then maybe like a tally tracking system is better. So I think working with the parent and what they're able to do is important.
Right. And then the parent just being able to,
Yeah.
like, if it's
And
not
don't-
working out, to just say like, hey, can we try a different method kind of thing? Like, it's not like all or nothing.
Absolutely. And again, it's that communication between the parent and the BC, and not being afraid to say, hey, I know I'm supposed to be tracking these this way, but that's just not realistic for me. How can I get you the information in a way that works for me?
Because we're all working together. Let's see. I know you kind of mentioned this beforehand, but what happens if the behaviors are too extreme or they get too extreme? Because I know like a lot of us, like we get into the teenage years, that's when everything, gets a little crazy. So what happens at that point?
Well, again, if with all the different experiences we have here at Skypoint and all the different BCs, for me, if that happened in my situation, the first thing that I would do is reach out to the other BCs that I know have more experience with that and ask them, explain the situation, ask for their recommendations. We also get monthly supervision, so I would discuss it there with Brittany, with Dr. Roy, to get support for myself and say, okay, what's going on? Because the last thing that I want to do is throw more change at my client. So if I at all can help it, I'm going to stick it out with them. I want them to be consistent. I want to be there with them. There is always the option of 100% stepping back and say, I no longer feel like I can give you the care that you need. So let's find someone else that can, and I always help with the transition process, whether it's within my company or a different company, because again, I want what's best for that client. So the more information I can give the new behaviorist, the better off it's going to be for them. But that is always my last resort, because again, consistency is very important. So I'm not gonna bow out unless I have absolutely exhausted all of my other resources. And that might be getting more support. That might be referring out for medications if they're not on any, or a med review. That might be reaching out to like a skill builder at Park Center. We have lots of resources besides behavior consulting that maybe would be beneficial and help with those. The teachers, I know a lot of times the IEP and education and things like that make a big deal. So just making sure that we have all of the supports necessary that could be beneficial.
And what happens if the parents disagree with the course of treatment? What steps should be taken? I know sometimes it's it's hard, like when you're asking for help, to be like, hey, I don't really agree with this, or you don't want to offend somebody. So what should happen?
They just need to be 100% honest about how they feel, for sure. Because if not, if everybody on the team isn't on the same page, you're not going to move forward.
Right.
So communication is key, and you have to have those difficult conversations sometimes. And that's okay. And then, like she said, I mean, after the communication, you might be going back to, we might have to go back and revise the plan, you know, try some new interventions and some new strategies. And of course, make sure that the parents are okay with the ones that we're choosing to move forward with. And then everything that Jessica kind of said would kind of fall into place, you know, as well in that scenario.
The earlier you can speak up as a parent, the better. So if we're just having the conversation initially and making a suggestion that the parent already knows, like, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm not going to enforce this, it's not going to happen, it's way better to speak up right then, before it's in the plan, before we've done the training, before we've tried to implement and enforce this, because that intermittent reinforcement really not good. And it's important for the BC and the parent to be on the same page so that we can support each other. And if right off the bat you already know that that's not going to happen, then we can adjust right then, and that will be way more beneficial. Mentioned earlier than later, although later is better than none at all.
Yeah.
And I think most BCs, when they're building that rapport with the client, they're also building that rapport with the parents. If not just as much, even more so, because we're supporting the parent. And I think that gives us the opportunity to learn what they're comfortable with also. And we can kind of pick up on those, you know, what they're steering away from, or even give them ideas before we start and let them know what we're about to do or what we want to try, and get their buy-in on that too. I think we're all pretty good about that.
And you said you are able to do like collaborations with schools and other therapies, right? Do you ever have issues getting access to the school? I know, because like HIPAA and all that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times we have issues getting into the school. There are ways around. There are some schools that are wonderful about letting us in, and there are some schools that there are some barriers. But parents, you know, I always talk to my parents about signing over, you know, a release so that I can talk to the parents. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just go straight, once I get that release, I'll just go straight to the teacher. And that way it's usually the administrative area that's putting the halt, you know. And so there are ways, and, you know, a lot of us, we network, some of us worked in the schools, work with people who have worked in the schools. There are ways to get in and get buy-in, even if it's writing. You know, we do what we have to for our clients, but even if it's, you know, writing a letter, or sometimes it's, you know, sending in, you know, I've had issues with one of my kiddos' schools where I pick them up. They just don't want me there. So when I go there, I'll have the kids, you know, write a thank you note or bring in cookies, and now they like it when I walk in the door. So we have our ways to support.
And I can add to that too, Laura, if you want me to.
Yes.
So sometimes we do have some difficulties getting into schools. Things that we can do is attend the IEP meetings. And I've done that with several of my clients. And so that allows me to go into school talking with, you know, all the teachers, the guidance counselor, and everyone involved in the case at school. So then everyone's on the same page, because as we already talked about, the consistency and routine is very important for all these individuals. So I think it was Sue Ann that said if we don't have that consistency and no one's communicating, there's not going to be any progress in the case. So I've been having some difficulties getting into school and things like that, but I'm doing everything that I possibly can, you know, talking to teachers, emailing teachers, talking to the guidance counselor, having these meetings, and making sure the school is having these meetings so that we can maintain the level of success, or change something so we can have some success in school if things aren't going the way we want to. But there are, like Lori said, even though if we aren't allowed to go into school and work with them, there are some ways around to make sure that there's open communication, that we're working with the schools and things like that.
I really want to point out, since Sue Ann's not pointing it out herself, but Sue Ann is extremely aware of the IEP process. And so she's actually created a whole document, and our other behavior consultants can kind of consult with her on that, where it explains the entire IEP to a caregiver and gives them recommendations on where they could advocate for different things, or additional questions that maybe they should ask about why this is in the IEP. So again, because we have this diverse group of behavior consultants that can each bring their own specialties to this work, she has this really amazing opportunity to help parents and the school system get on the same page with kind of her expertise there.
Oh, that's
Well, along with
awesome.
that, along with the IEP, it's always good to find out what the school's goals are, to see if there are goals that need to be reinforced at home, to see if you can have that consistency across environments. That's not always the case. For instance, I have one kiddo who doesn't know how to be a student, just sitting in a seat, that kind of thing, and having attention at school. So that's what they're mainly focused on. But at home, there's different kinds of behaviors, inappropriate toileting and physical aggression. So, sometimes it's not always exactly the same, but it's great when it can be consistent across both environments. Just kind of, again, you got to do what the needs are for each situation. So throw that out there too. And you can invite whoever you want to an IEP meeting. So just always remember that.
Do you have like go-to techniques for the more extreme behaviors, like the biting, aggression, destruction of property kind of things? Like, are there like certain things that?
So I can kind of touch on that. So as I said before, I have a couple clients that are pretty defiant and have some aggressive behaviors. And so kind of a open-ended question, but even though it says there are some go-tos, or the questions asking about go-tos and things like that, as you know, there's no cookie cutter solution for every single person. So one thing that I've noticed that helps out a lot is the relationship that you build with the people that you're working with. And I'll tie this into, let's see, the questions here about why some are more focused on paperwork and more focused on the face-to-face time. And a lot of the individuals that I work with personally, the time that they get outside the home is only with me. And for them, the relationship that I build with them and them understanding that I'm an asset and I'm here to support them is the biggest thing for them. And some of their behaviors are because they don't have positive role models and the things aren't happening like they're supposed to at home. And as we already talked about, the consistency of home, school, and with me needs to be all the same and the same expectations, or else there's nothing's going to change. And building that relationship with them allows them to work with me and have respect for me, to listen and work towards different goals. And then once I get the respect and rapport with the client, I'm also building it with the parent as well. And once we have the open relationship with the parent, then I can talk to both the client and the parent at the same time about the consistency that needs to happen. And then I start to see the behavior start improving after the initial relationship building. And so that's why I focus more on the face-to-face time initially, besides the paperwork and tracking, just because I could just be another service provider of, the previous 30 came in, nothing happened, and I'm a new one, just a new face. And I want them to know that I'm here to stay and I'm here to push for all their needs, and I'm going to support them in any way I possibly can. And I think that's the number one thing that I've done, is to make sure they know that I'm not just another provider, not just another face, that I'm here to stay and to support them in any way possible. And after the client and the family both know that, it's been very successful for me. So in a roundabout way, that's how I can kind of get the gist of it. Does that make sense to you?
I have also found that one of the challenges when you first go into a home, parent-child relationship, and we're coming in as an outsider, and especially with those more extreme behaviors, a lot of the times by the time a BC gets in the home, the parents they're just at their wits' end. They're angry, they're fed up, they've tried everything that they can think of, they love their child, and they don't understand why they're still acting out this way, why they're still hitting me and biting their siblings and all of these things. And And so there's so much resentment and anger there, that a lot of the times I have to spend a lot of time working with the parents. And it's a state mandated thing, but we as BCs cannot encourage or do, I guess, punishment. So even with these extreme physical aggression, property destruction types of behaviors, we're not going to advocate for punishment. And sometimes that's really hard for the parents to grasp. Because in our culture, that's how it works. Like if you hit someone, you're punished. You go on timeout, you lose your privileges, you whatever. And we have a little bit of leeway there, but it sometimes takes some going around to help the parents understand that even though we can't, punish the children, there are still some things that we can do. And it helps to remember that, especially with the population, but with all of them, kids are doing the best they can with what they've got. So a big thing of what I encourage and advocate for, which is really hard, parents, is changing the environment around them. Why are they biting? Why are they being aggressive? What's going on in the environment? Are they overstimulated? Are they being asked to do something that they simply don't have the skills to do? All sorts of things. So a lot of the time it's kind of on the front end of that behavior as opposed to the back end and, responding to it. We do have some de-escalation techniques and things like that. And we can do, safe rooms and removing the audience or the target and things like that. But a lot of it is, okay, so every time you ask him to brush his teeth, he, hits you. What is it about? What can we change about the teeth brushing process that will make it less painful for him or her or whatever? A lot of it is on that front end, and a lot of the work there, falls on the parents to change the situation. So it can be really hard. That's how I go about it.
And to kind of follow up with what both Jordan and Jessica said, once you build that rapport, and sometimes building that rapport is just what, like Jessica said, when we get in there, sometimes it's just so extreme. The parents are so distraught, and it's changing the energy in the environment by helping the parent de-escalate. Like they've escalated, so now they're escalating their kiddo and they don't even realize it. And so a lot of it's like finding the parent a therapist, or listening and being their support system. And then once you build the rapport with the parent, you can start training those things to change the environment, and they'll trust you. Like, teaching them the flags, whatever flags or triggers their kiddo's having, or just sensory ideas in the home that will just calming things, not just for the kid, but for the whole entire family, or even like other siblings.
And it's like that second pair of eyes kind of thing. Cause like, even though like parents know your kids, you might not be aware of something that's going on that an outsider can see.
Right. Especially when you're so stressed about your kids. Yeah.
Right.
I was going to add, so consistency and follow through is really important when you're working on any behavior, but especially if it's some extreme behavior. And you have to expect that when you start working on those initially, they tend to get worse before they get better. So parents really have to understand they're going to have to weather the storm. I think using consistent language, simple language typically is best, less is more, is very important. Piggybacking on what Lori said, parents should also take advantage of respite if they have that ability in their treatment plan for their kiddo. And then as a last resort, or, just depending where you are in the timeline of the behaviors and how you're feeling, I think medication is something that you really need to consider if you haven't at this point.
Right. I know we advocate a lot for self-care of the parents, because if they're not taking care of themselves, how are they gonna, take care of the kids? And I also am glad you brought up the punishment thing, because I think a lot of people have this view of like old school punishment, and that's how you handle it. And you can do other things. You can do the positive reinforcement. You can do like the negative reinforcement kind of thing, and just play around with that. I think sometimes parents feel pressured, like if their kid is acting out in a store or something, and if you're not, doing what society thinks you should be doing, kind of thing. That's my own little spiel, but whatever. So we have a lot of
Ask a follow-up question, just because I think that this brought something up. When talking about severe behaviors, a lot of it was directed at the parent. So I know one of the questions you wanted to ask is behavior management more for the client, or is it more for the parent? And I think we missed it. So this might be a good time to go back to it.
Okay.
Maybe Jordan wants to answer it.
All right, perfect. So it is definitely a combination of both. And the word of the day seems to be consistency. And if the parent isn't following the direction of the BC or following the BSP or the crisis plan, then there's not going to be any consistency at home. And that's the biggest amount of time outside of school. Is, that's where they're living at, and that's where they see most of the modeling, if the parent's modeling appropriate behavior, things like that. And working with the parent is just important as a kid, because if the kid's with me and knows the expectations and they go home and the expectations aren't the same, it's going to be all over the place. And especially with a child that's on the spectrum, it may be very confusing for them too, and they don't know how to act in school. And if they act in school, it's different from home and different from with the BC, and their behaviors could even escalate because they don't know how to act in certain areas. And so having the open communication, as I already talked about, and having a plan for the crisis, and doing BSP training with the parents as well is very important, so that they know what to expect, and whenever there is a crisis, they know who to contact, and there's just a plan for anything. And it's very important to be proactive and not reactive in this field. And so I may have a client that isn't really too aggressive and isn't too bad, but I want to make sure that crisis plan is in place just in case something were to happen, and so the parent has that in their toolbox to handle. So I do think it is a good combination of training the parents and the kids, and more importantly, I think Lori was talking about it, is when they're in a crisis, it may be hard to see the A, the B, and the C, but reporting that and maintaining that level of communication is absolutely crucial to have progress in this field.
I like what you said about teaching the parent, and it is a lot about the training. It's also something we haven't really talked about yet. It's also sometimes about training the parent on autism, or what the disability is, and how a child with autism might look at a situation differently than the parent, or when they look like they're being sassy on their face, but they're saying the right words, they might not realize they're being, they look sassy or they're behaving that way. Just different things related, different behaviors related to the disability, and how we go about to try to change them and make help the parents to understand that it might seem disrespectful or defiant, but that might not even be the child's intent. And then that may be what escalates it into a more serious situation.
Right. I know.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I know, like, one of my things, I didn't understand the sensory needs that much because I don't have the same sensory needs. So having someone else kind of explain that to me definitely helped. So go ahead, Jessica.
I had an old supervisor actually say, whose problem is it? Which really resonated with me, especially with some of those annoying behaviors we see a lot on the autism spectrum disorder, the sensory stimulation, the self-stim, things like that. Sometimes it's not the kid's problem, it's the parent's problem. If it annoys you, deal with it. That's not on them. That's not necessarily something that we need to change within the child just because you're annoyed or a sibling is annoyed. Like, that sucks. I would love for you to not be annoyed, but that's not their problem. And that would be something that I would address with the parent or with the sibling. Even we can also work on with siblings. We have a lot of flexibility in the kind of treatment that we provide, which I love. But sometimes, asking yourself or asking the parent, whose problem really is this, can be real helpful.
And to piggyback off that, Jessica, having the open communication with the parent and them understanding that this is still a child. This is still a child with autism, and I'm not expecting perfection. And when I was a kid, I made mistakes. That's how you learn. And it's very important to make sure that the parents know that there's still going to be behaviors, there's still going to be mistakes that's happened, and it's a part of life. So, like Jessica said, there may be some small little annoying behaviors that are impacting services or his life that much, and this may be something that the parent's going to have to tolerate because it's not affecting the kid in a negative way, and that's a part of the parent training and talking to them about that. So that was great, Jessica.
And something I've learned the hard way, or I learned in the beginning doing this, it's important for kids not to think or not to feel like we're coming in there and we're just going to concentrate on their negative behaviors. It's because when we get there, when we walk in the door, then they know that's our expectation, and that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to meet our expectations, but to celebrate their greatness. So I've learned that, like, I have to find out what's the greatness in this kiddo. And when I go into the school, I was in the school the other day, and a little girl said, "Are you his mom?" And I said, "No, I am just someone who comes here to support so-and-so's greatness." And that day it happened to be respect and great listening. So just things like that. So they look forward to seeing us, and they're excited about working with us, and not that they look at us and think, oh, just another person who's going to judge me for, the 3 target behaviors or whatever. But I did learn that the hard way with a couple of my kiddos when I'd walk in there and their parents would want to talk about, those behaviors in front of them. And that's so important too, just to keep that separate from the kids.
How much say does a parent have in treatment after the client turns 18?
That really all lays on whether they obtain guardianship or not. And that is easier to do before the individual turns 18. So they should really start that process early, not wait until they turn 18 and then go, oh crap, maybe I should be their guardian because they can't make these decisions for themselves. So I really, when they hit that 17 age, I start talking with my clients about, hey, do you want to be their guardian? Do you think they need a guardian? If they need one, but you don't want to be it, like there are other options, things like that. Because if a parent does not become the legal guardian of a child, then they really have no say. They can advocate, they can still be a part of the treatment team, but it really at that point all has to do with the child and the client. And if they say, I don't want to do that, or I don't want my mom at the meeting, then we have to honor that. So it is really important in those situations, if the parents want to continue and they believe that that's what's in the best interest of their child, that they obtain that legal guardianship.
Can a behavioral specialist follow a client from family support waiver to CIH?
Absolutely. And the services can also continue if they change their living environment too. So we have lots of clients that live independently or live in a waiver house that we're also able to support. So
we cannot, however, follow them group home. That's a different funding source, and that's a different total other lane. So that is one of the places where we cannot follow them. We have a lot of clients that go from family support to group home and then back to CIH. I actually just had that. And so I was his when he had family support, and then he left and went to a group home. He was there for about a year and he came out, and now I'm on his case again. But we cannot follow to a group home.
We've had a couple of instances where the group home will contract with us so that they can have consistency in care. And that's a really awesome group home that's willing to do that for a client.
And that's usually just because they have their own like in-house, correct?
Yes. Yeah, they're required to provide it as well.
But do they usually talk to who they had previous, like the previous behavioral consultants?
Not all of them will reach out, but we would ideally have a transition plan where we would be providing that behavior support plan and other documentation and be available to that staff, because consistency in care is so important, especially during transition times.
Right.
For mine that have transitioned to group homes, I have worked very closely with the group home staff. I provided BSP training. I've even offered and haven't a few times just did the BSP because a plan for a home family living environment is different than a plan for a group home or a residential living environment. So I have also worked with them to adjust the plan in advance so that it is more attuned to that group home living environment, so that they have, you know, a better springboard. Again, it's not about whether the client is mine or not, it's about what's best for them. So that smooth transition, training those staff members, all of that. I do whatever I can, whatever they're willing. And I always reach out and say, hey, can I do a BSP training? Can I meet the lead staff? All of those things, because in my experience, they don't reach out for that. They'll accept the help. I've never had them say no, but they won't reach out.
And then I think my last question, I know like parents get frustrated, but I think it's also important that, you know, providers get frustrated also because of like limitations. So again, in a fairy tale world, if you could change anything about the waiver system, what would it be?
I'll answer first. I appreciate that more funds are available for family support waiver and that more people are off of that wait list. But I do wish that the burden for lifelong care wasn't on caregivers. You know, our children are meant to go out into the world. We're meant to only get them through the first phase of their lives. And it is, I wish there was more supports to families for that natural transition through life for the clients that we're serving, and to meet their needs as they age slightly different. So some middle ground there.
Mm-hmm. You stole my answer, Brittany. That's okay. I can piggyback off that a little bit. I really wish that the DSPs, that direct support professionals, were paid better, and that kind of has to do with that funding. But when you're paying $10 an hour to do such valuable and difficult work, you don't get quality staff. They don't stick around for long because it's a really hard job for really low pay. And that's so frustrating. And what you end up having is that the staff that are good at their job don't stick around for long. They find something else that pays better. You do get some that obviously 100% are not in it for the pay, but in general, you end up with staff that are not consistent. They don't follow the plan. They are on their phones all day. Like, they're not there for the client. They're there to make sure the house doesn't burn down and no one dies. And when you ask more than that, they're just not interested. So it's really hard to have that consistency and that follow through and that positive living environment when the pay isn't there to support it. So I've been really excited that is slowly increasing. They're realizing that, they're upping the pay, but it makes it really hard, and it's not fair to the client or the parents. It's not a good situation.
All right.
I would just say, I think Brittany kind of touched on this too, is that the waiting, I think it's a 2-year wait list right now, which is, I have a kiddo through DCS who has applied for the waiver, and it's a 2-year wait list. So he won't get services when DCS is gone. But I mean, we'll continue to do what we can, but, and then also the the deadline, what is it? Is it 21? Sorry, 22. What about the kiddos that have parents that didn't realize, that they could have waiver services, or, young adults who are out in the world who maybe did go age out of DCS and didn't have a service provider who knew how to get them the waiver services, the lifetime services that they could have. So I just, that makes me sad for individuals older than 22 who just haven't been discovered yet.
I didn't know that was a thing. There's a limit to when you can apply.
You have to show proof of diagnosis prior to the age of 22.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, again, kind of those unidentified later in life end up without the option.
Sue Ann or Jordan, any wish list for you guys?
So I work primarily with DCS, so my expertise is not in the waiver. So that's also something else to consider whenever you're picking a BC. So I don't have too much to say on changing the waiver.
No, I'm good with what the other ladies said.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much for volunteering to do this. I know the parents in our support group will be very appreciative. So I'll definitely give them your contact information. And you guys, I know Brittany is on the Discord. If you guys wanted to join the Discord, just to kind of pop in there, you can. And we'll definitely reach out to you guys for more interviews and stuff.
That
So,
sounds great. We'd love to participate as much as we can.
all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.